It's good to see you. Oh, good morning.
So, do you like being called Mr. Director or Congressman, which is a higher title?
That's not even close. It's director is much better than Congressman. So, I'm looking at Jeb and Maxine when I say that. So,
yeah.
I don't have to do fundraisers anymore. So,
well, that's interesting you say that, because you said something a few months ago that attracted a lot of attention, and I wanted to see if you have an opportunity to explain it, which is the comment about if somebody had given money to your campaign, you would talk to them or not, or if they hadn't, you wouldn't. Elizabeth Warren, who I interviewed over the weekend, said that that was another example.
Did she mention me? Probably.
She didn't on this occasion, but previously she said that was an example of the most corrupt administration in history. Yeah. Can you address what you were?
Yeah, and she wrote me a letter about it. What I said, by the way, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, was I was giving a speech to a large group of, I can't even remember who they were, community bankers, I think. And they were in town for their annual March on the Hill. A lot of organizations will do this. They were there to go meet their delegates or their representation in Congress. And I was trying to encourage them. So what I said was exaggerating to prove a point, which is like, look, if you were a lobbyist who gave me money, maybe I would meet with you. If you're a lobbyist who didn't give me any money, I would meet with you. But if you came from back home, I always took time to meet with you. And I was encouraging them to stay engaged in the process, that money does not really buy access like it does in Washington, D.C. It's important for people from back home to come up and get involved. And of course, folks who were not at the speech took the text out of context and said a bunch of things that I'd said that I was selling access and so forth, which is completely false. Elizabeth and a bunch of other folks sent a letter. There was a very brief investigation, and I think the Office of Special Counsel sent a letter, which I sent back to Senator Warren. And of course, we never heard anything back from her after this. It said, not only did Mulvaney not say what you say that he said, but anybody who read it in context said he was actually encouraging people to stay involved in the democratic process. So I think it's pretty much gone away after that.
So it was, you meant the opposite of what?
Yeah, I was encouraging those folks to stay involved, not hire lobbyists. Don't rely on other people to make your case for you, especially if you're grassroots folks from back home. Come up and I think I said that is a fundamental principle of our representative democracy, and I still think that it is, and I still encourage people. It's you know, you want to write a check to a national organization, that's great, but taking the time to actually come to Washington, D.C. to talk about things that are important to you is what we need. Keep in mind the number of things that Maxine and Jeb and I will deal with, or I used to deal with when I was on the Hill, in any particular day could be literally infinite. The number of things that a member of Congress has to be conversant on is almost unlimited. And we sometimes do not know what's important to you until you actually take time to tell us. And I still think that's a message that needs to be said.
Well, I mean, I would say, I think a lot of members of Congress do pay attention to who gives and not gives when they sit down with them. So it's not as if that behavior doesn't exist,
yeah.
But it's also the definition of the swamp.
Still, nothing counts more than real people coming up to get involved. Yeah. It really does. If you get we all get these from time to time. You get a form email, and the form emails, you pretty much know that. I got one the other day over at the Bureau. I got 100 of, no, it was actually during the reorganization. We had talked about trying to unite food safety with USDA instead of splitting it now between the USDA and the FDA. It's the example I gave about how a chicken is regulated by the USDA. It lays an egg that's regulated by the FDA. You break the egg to make an omelet. It's regulated again by the USDA. It's true, by the way. It's just crazy. And I gave that example at a cabinet meeting that got some press.
Good eggs this morning, by the way.
Yeah, they were. I didn't know Hensling's eating my eggs. I didn't get a chance to eat them. They are good. And then I got like 150 emails the next day saying, you know, supplements are not food, which is great, and I think that's fantastic. But it was the exact same email, so I know that somebody had put out a thing saying, send this to Mulvaney. They published my email address. I read the first two and then threw the rest of them away. But if you take time, sir, to actually write me a letter, say, Mick, I saw you speak at this thing. I wanted you to know this, 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 and this. I actually write that. Real people can still have an impact in the outcome in Washington, D.C. It just have to take the time to do it, and it's not easy. We still actually like hearing from ordinary folks, from rank-and-file people. We don't like dealing all the time with lobbyists and with national organizations. There's value to doing this.
Okay. Let's talk about where we are at this moment. You're the budget director. You're looking at a $1 trillion deficit next year.
Yep.
That's not what the president campaigned on, returning to trillion-dollar deficits. He has imposed tariffs on goods coming into the United States, which raises prices for consumers. Foreign countries have retaliated, which hurts our exporters. And now you're going to write a $12 billion check to bail out some of the people hurt. Does that make sense?
Which one do you want me to start with?
All of them. Because it seems you're a small government conservative, and it seems that all of this is diametrically opposed to what you believe in.
Okay, okay, that's the larger question, right? Is how does a small government fiscal conservative sort of reconcile this? And this is what I tell people. I've told people this from the very first budget that I wrote, which is that I don't make the final decisions. I don't. I'm not the President of the United States. The boss makes those decisions. I satisfy myself by knowing that on each of the issues that you just raised, from deficits to trade policy to to the agricultural program that we announced yesterday, that at least I'm in there, and I am in there, in the Oval Office, making these cases. And I'm not the only one, by the way. Rest assured that on the ag policy, the President heard every single side of the argument. On trade policy, he continues to hear every single side of the argument. I'm on one side of the argument, along with probably guys like Larry Kudlow, and then you've got folks like Peter Navarro and Wilbur Ross on the other side of the argument. The President hears all of the arguments, and that he makes the final decision. That's how it has to be, okay? And I'm satisfied with that. If I'm not there, I'm not comfortable with those arguments are being made, but I know that they are, and the President makes those final decisions.
Are you frustrated by the direction of policy right now?
Would it be what I would do if I was the President? No, but I'm not the President. I'm not frustrated in that for the first time here, and I'll speak to this because Jeb and I went through this together as some of the more conservative members of the House. Sometimes one of our major frustrations, to use your word, and it is the right word, was that we simply weren't being considered. We weren't being heard. That there was no room for the conservative, for the fiscal conservative discussion within the House Republican Conference, and that the conservatives were completely shut out. In fact, a friend of mine from the Freedom Caucus, I was a founding member of that group, called me after one of the first budgets came out and said, "Mulvaney, it sounds like you're losing a lot." And I said, "Yeah, but at least I'm losing at the very highest levels." I used to lose in the basement of the tortilla.
Now you're losing in the World Series.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So am I frustrated? Frustrated is not the right word. Am I disappointed that maybe I'm not advocating better to change an outcome? Yes, but I'm 100% comfortable coming in and defending these policies, because I know in part that the President has heard all different sides of the argument. He gets to make the final decision.
Is there a point at which you say, I can't be part of this anymore?
No. Well, I mean, at some point, yeah, you don't do this forever, right? But no, not even.
No, but I don't mean on time basis. I mean on the basis of this is going away from what I think is best.
If I thought that the President did not give due consideration to if I wasn't adding value to the conversation, then yeah, you throw your hands up and say, look, maybe somebody else can do this better. But I'm absolutely, because I know it for a fact, because I talk to him almost every day, that he does consider these things. Look at how he handled the omnibus. When he signed it, he almost didn't sign it. Part of I think his calculation that was, wait a second, maybe we are spending too much money. Maybe we did give away too much of non-defense discretionary in order to get the defense money that we need, and maybe we're not going to do that again. In fact, I think he said exactly that. We're not going to do that again. So that's one of those examples where, maybe over the course of time, things are sort of moving in a more fiscally conservative way. Another example, when the President first came in the very first budget, we talked about entitlement reform, Medicare and Social Security. He looked at me and said, no, wait a second. I ran for office telling people I wasn't going to change those two things. I'm not going to be one of these politicians who runs on one thing and then does another after I get elected. So no, you can't touch those things. I'm not going to let you. And over the course of the next year, we're able to talk about Medicare and come to an understanding that some pieces of Medicare are not what you folks think it is, and it's certainly not what the President thought that it was. Did you know, for example, that your Medicare taxes go to pay for graduate medical school tuition? Did you know that your Medicare taxes go to pay for bad debts from non-Medicare patients at hospitals? My guess is you didn't. I didn't. The President didn't. But we did get a commitment from him to try and reform those pieces of Medicare. And I think that's moving things in the right direction from a fiscal conservative standpoint.
Take us inside the room, reconstruct as an example the exchange, when you, Larry Kudlow, others make that case, no, we should be a market-oriented administration that does not throw up barriers, does not pass out subsidies to people affected by the barriers. What does he say to you?
A couple different things. We are a market-oriented economy. We are a market-oriented administration. This is the one thing I don't think, and this is not going to speak exactly to your question, so I'll come back to that in a second. On trade, everything the president has done, I say this to business groups all over the country, and it still surprises me that we get the reaction to trade that we get. Everything the administration has done up to now, from an economic policy, we call it MAGAnomics at OMB, it's the Make America Great Again economics, everything from regulatory policy to tax policy to energy policy to you name it, has been aimed at one thing, and that is getting the American economy back on track, getting to 3% growth, maybe 4% growth, maybe above 4% growth. Everything we've done has been pointed in that same direction. So why are we all of a sudden now being accused of doing the exact opposite on trade? And I would suggest to you instead that what we're doing on trade is also pointed in the same direction. It's just a lot harder to do. Regulation we can do by ourselves, okay, for the most part. Tax policy, we have to work with the Congress, and we did on that. On trade policy, by the way, and getting Congress to do what you want them to do is really, really hard.
You didn't work with Maxine Waters on that tax policy.
I've worked with Maxine Waters on other stuff, and I enjoy working with Maxine. She's a friend. Trade policy is even harder because you have to get the Chinese and other countries to do what you want them to do. You have to change their behavior, and that's really, really hard. So is it going to be messier than regulatory reform was or tax reform was? Yes. Is it aimed in the same direction? Absolutely. So I disagree with the premise that we're not a market-based economy, that we're taking that away, that we're not a market-based administration. I think you saw this morning something the president reiterated this morning that he said at the G7. I hope it gets the attention it deserves. He tweeted out something he said at the G7 that I don't think everybody picked up on, which is the Europeans are coming in town today. Happy to talk to them about our trade policies. Here's what it is. Zero tariffs, zero tariff barriers, zero subsidies. Who wants in on that? Is that a non-market-based system? Is that a protectionist system? That's true free trade, and that's what we're trying to get to. That's what we're trying to get to some place where we can grow the economy, and I hope he gets credit for that.
Let me go back to tax policy because we were talking about deficits before. And we have, through this tax bill, raised the trajectory of budget deficits. But we've also, if you look at all the major forecasters, Goldman Sachs, Tax Foundation, Penn Wharton, Federal Reserve, none of them say that we've raised the growth trajectory beyond the approximate 2% mark that we were before.
Yeah.
Why is that? And is that not an illustration of the fact that the promises that you guys made about the effect of the tax cuts were simply wrong?
Those are the same folks that list that you just ran down. You could add to that list. Yeah. Are folks who said we'd never get to 3% anyway. I mean, I remember when I first rolled out our first budget in March of 2017, and we had projected at that time as part of our, when you do a budget, you sort of look in a 10-year window. And we had projected that we'd go from, I think at that point, about 2.1, 2.2% growth, that we go from 2.3 to 2.5 to 2.7, and maybe 3 or 4 years out with our policies, we might get to 3. And all those folks that you just said we were nuts. In fact, I meant.
And they still say you're nuts.
They still say we're nuts. They said we could never do that. We could never get to any of that. We've gotten faster than they. By the way, who was it? It was Krugman. Who says one of my favorite lines. He said, "You could make me the total dictator of the world, and I can never get you more than a couple tenths of a percentage point." Okay. Thankfully, we did not make Paul Krugman the dictator. We made Donald Trump president. Everybody said we couldn't get there. They're heavily invested in saying we can't get there. Face it. If you've been selling for the last 2-3 generations the idea that higher taxes, more regulation, and more government intervention in the markets is the way to growth. And it hadn't worked for 8 years under the Obama administration, and along comes this new administration and says, we are going to cut regulation, we're going to cut taxes, and you get growth from that. You have to see us fail. All right? So when we first started, they said it's never going to work. Now it seems to be working, and what they're saying, yeah, well, it's working, but it's only going to work for a short period. Long term, it's not going to pay off. What else are they going to say? Because if they say it's going to work, then they have nothing to sell from their economic perspective.
So you continue to believe that they're all wrong, and that in the fullness of time, we are going to get to 3 or 4% growth.
How about this? I believe they're as right now as they were a year ago. How about that? I do believe that 3% growth is sustainable. I absolutely believe it, and I believe that
because nobody said you couldn't get 3% for a quarter. I mean, Obama got 5% for a quarter. The question is, can you sustain it? And none of them say you can.
Well, I don't know when the numbers come out. I think the numbers come out Friday? Is that Friday? And if the numbers are where all of those same folks say it's going to be, we will be at 3% sustained for a whole year now. That never happened under the Obama administration. First administration ever. That's one of the reasons that I don't know why saying 3% growth is so outrageous. We've done it forever. I mean, you go back to, pick any long period of time, from the World War II to now, from the Great Depression until now, from the Civil War till now, and 3% growth is what we do as a nation. And I don't know when it became orthodoxy that says we can never, ever, ever do that again, and anybody who says we can is crazy. Do we face challenges in that? Yes. Do we have an aging population? Yes. Do we have productivity challenges? Absolutely. But we've always been able to overcome that. One of the reasons I was so excited about what we did in the tax bill, and it's one of those things that I don't think gets enough attention, is the way that we changed depreciation on capital investment. That's one of the biggest pieces, I think, of the tax bill, the way that we're going to change the way you invest in your business, because we need that capital investment in order to drive the productivity, in order to drive that economic growth. Economic growth is a function basically of two things: the number of people working and their productivity. The more capital investment, the more productivity they have. So we do think that by changing that tax code, we get the permanent, long-term, sustainable growth that we're talking about.
Two things quickly before I let you go. Financial regulation, of course, your other hat right now is...
I've heard of it, yes.
You're the acting head of the CFPB, at least until Kathy Kraninger gets confirmed.
We call it the BCFP. Yeah, okay, that's fine.
We are 10 years removed from the financial crisis.
Yeah.
Would you say that right now the U.S. financial system is safe, adequately protected, needs no more regulation, in fact needs less regulation than it now has?
I think we need better regulation than we have now. The Dodd-Frank statute is actually, I mean, you go and you take a look at it, and there's all sorts of parts that I don't like about it, and if you all want to repeal it, that would be great. So knock yourselves out. If that doesn't happen, it's a statute you can live with. Because it's probably a lot more detailed than people realize. The Dodd-Frank statute, I'm sorry, as it pertains to my bureau, the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection, actually requires us to do 5 things, among which are protect consumers, which is the part that everybody knows about and the part that got all the attention under the previous leadership. But in the same section of the statute, it says that we are supposed to look for unduly and burdensome regulations and get rid of them, that we are sort of supposed to promote innovation. We are supposed to promote efficiencies of market and access to capital. Those are not bad things. The law is not what's broken in that particular circumstance. What's broken is the way that we have chosen to prioritize and to administer that law. And I think if we can get smart regulation of what's on the books, we can do better. You're talking to a Republican. Do I think there are regs we could get rid of? Absolutely. Do I think we can have a lighter hand when it comes to regulating our economy? Yes. Do I think that when you do that, the economy responds in the way that it has? Yes. In fact, I think I can make the argument that most of the economic growth that you've seen in the first 18 months of this administration has more to do with the deregulatory policies than it has the tax policies, because the tax policy is not really sort of filtered through the economy yet. But this idea that less regulation coming from the government, a lighter hand of regulation, does result in a better, healthier economy, better wages, better opportunities. I think I can make that case because I think it's actually working.
Okay. Last question.
Yes, sir.
And
I used to be a Southerner, by the way, which means I talked a lot slower, but they yelled at me that I didn't get enough questions.
You have no accent. I don't believe that.
I am born and raised in the South. So.
We just had a summit in Helsinki last week in which the president met privately with Vladimir Putin for a couple of hours. Nobody really knows what happened in that meeting. National security officials don't seem to know. The president came out, expressed confidence in the Russian president, raised doubts about the U.S. intelligence agency. Is there any part of you, late at night when you're by yourself, that says, maybe there's something going on here that's bad?
No. Those meetings are always private, aren't they? I mean, when Reagan went in with Gorbachev, did he come out and say, a private meeting with Gorbachev, walk out and said, nah, by the way, Tom, here's everything that we just talked about. That's not how these work.
But you know what I'm asking. I'm talking about in the relationship between this president, Russia, the Russian president.
You ask me a straight question, I give you a straight answer. No. I don't worry about that at all.
Mick Mulvaney, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, y'all.